Hi, I'm Matthew Piccolo, an attorney licensed in Nevada and Utah. In this video, I'll answer this question: what is the best way to request a reasonable accommodation from your employer? Under the ADA, if you have a disability, your employer must provide a reasonable accommodation for you, unless it would cause your employer an undue hardship. So what's the best way to request an accommodation? Well, you need to let your employer know you need an adjustment or change at work to help address a medical condition. You can request an accommodation yourself, or you can ask a representative to do it, such as a family member, friend, health professional, or attorney. So how do you need to request a reasonable accommodation? At a minimum, you need to request it verbally. The request can be made using plain English and doesn't need to mention the ADA or even use the phrase reasonable accommodation. Ideally, though, the request should be in writing to make it more official, and also so the writing can serve as clear evidence of your request at a later time if needed. It's also best to mention the ADA and use the phrase reasonable accommodation just to make it clear. Be sure to include any other language that helps describe your medical situation and your need for an accommodation. Some employers might ask their employees to fill out a specific form to request an accommodation. That's fine so long as they don't ignore a prior request. What should you include in your request? You should include information explaining what disability you have, how it limits your ability to work effectively, and what specific measures your employer might take to help you be as effective as you can. Your employer doesn't necessarily have to adopt the measures you suggest, but your suggestions can be a starting point for discussion. When should you make the request? You can request an accommodation at any time during the application process or during your employment. It's okay to request an accommodation once you're employed, even if you didn't during the application process. Can your employer ask you for documentation about your medical issue? Yes, if the disability or need for an accommodation is not obvious, then an employer can ask for reasonable documentation to describe your limitations. However, your employer can't ask for documentation about anything unrelated to your disability or your need for an accommodation. Ideally, when you submit your request in writing, you should provide documentation from an appropriate and qualified professional, such as a doctor, psychologist, physical therapist, speech therapist, or anyone else who's qualified to provide an opinion about your disability and need for an accommodation. Can your employer require you to be examined by a healthcare professional of its choice? Yes, but only if you don't provide enough information from your chosen professional to show you have an ADA disability and need a reasonable accommodation. Also, your employer should give you an opportunity to provide any missing information before requiring you to visit its own professional. How soon does your employer need to respond to your request? Well, there's no specific timeline required. An employer should respond as quickly as possible. If needed, the employer should engage in an interactive process quickly to determine your needs and how it can meet them. Unnecessary delays can become a violation of the ADA. Well, that's it for this video. Contact me if you have questions. My website is piccololawoffices.com. Thanks for watching.